Thank you to New Mexico Secretary of State Maggie Toulouse Oliver for making time for us in your busy schedule.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Well, we want to talk about some of the voting reforms that you and Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham have put out. Big picture, what is the problem that you're trying to solve here?
So, big picture, what this legislation is trying to do is trying to send a message that there are still barriers to the ballot box. Even here in New Mexico, where we have wonderful voting laws, we have one of the best election administration processes in the nation. We're in the top 10. We do fantastic work here, but there are still people and places where it is hard to cast a ballot. And so the purpose of this legislation is to say, look, in this time where we are seeing voting rights being rolled backward in many places across the country, and in this time where we're seeing our Congress unable to come together and address some of these important issues, we are going to take the lead here in New Mexico to move this legislation, this kind of legislation forward.
So, talking about barriers to the ballot box, can you give us some specific examples of those barriers?
Yeah, sure. It's really hard in a lot of our tribal communities and rural communities to get your mail timely at your home address to make sure that so if you're voting by mail, to get that ballot timely, to mail that ballot back and make sure it's received timely. We're trying to address that in some of these provisions. It is hard for people to register to vote who don't already have a driver's license or state ID here in New Mexico. And, I think it's a very popular notion that pretty much everybody has one of those things. That's an otherwise eligible citizen, but that's not always the case. I mean, we have elderly folks and people with disabilities and, people who just do not, for whatever other reason, have an ID. So we want to reduce that barrier for them. And, one of the biggest challenges for our democracy is having more young people participate. And why that's a challenge and why it's important is because the future of our democracy depends on our citizen participation. We know that voting is habitual. The younger folks get registered and start participating in elections, the more likely they are to be lifelong voters and contributing citizens in that way.
So one of the perhaps most controversial elements that you've got here is lowering the voting age to 16 in some cases. And so is what you're saying, that it's like a gateway drug to voting? Like you want to get them while they're teenagers and get them hooked?
Yeah, yeah, and what a great gateway, right? We have a lot of negative ones. Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And I think, we have a generation of high school kids right now who are incredibly engaged and incredibly aware about the world around them. And one of the things they are incredibly aware of is the fact that, school boards and decisions that are made at that level have a really meaningful impact on their daily lives, whether it has to do with whether or not they wear masks to school or can even physically go to school or not. If members of the trans and queer community, whether or not they can feel comfortable in their schools. Folks who are concerned, kids who are concerned about school, guns in schools and violence at schools. These are big decisions that impact them every day. Many of them have jobs. They're paying gross receipts tax. They're helping support their families, and so it really, I think, would be meaningful for them to also have a say in these kinds of elections. And again, get them to, start becoming these, habitual voters and these, participating members of society as they move forward in life.
Now, when it comes to other topics, we spend a lot of time talking about how 16-year-olds, 19-year-olds, their brains are not fully developed. I mean, there's a lot of 16-year-olds out there that can't be trusted to make a dentist appointment, much less evaluate some complicated issues on the ballot. Are 16-year-olds really aware and connected and mature enough to be given this responsibility?
Well, I know a lot of 45-year-olds who can't make a dentist appointment. I mean, that's the thing. I think, as we've seen over time, the notion of who can be a participating citizen in our democracy has continued to shift with the times. I mean, as you know, Gwyneth, when our country was founded, only white men were considered, and those who owned property, were considered to have enough sort of knowledge, experience, wisdom to be able to cast that ballot and elect our leaders. And of course, over time, the right to vote has been expanded to include, all men and women, regardless of their, ethnic or gender background, over the age of 18. We did not have a constitutional amendment to allow 18-year-olds who are going off to war and losing their lives for our democracy. They did not have the right to vote until the 70s, right? And so this is just sort of the next step in the potential expansion of our democracy. And if nothing else, I think it's worth an important conversation. I do think that if a 16-year-old is aware enough to want to register to vote and participate in an election, have enough of an opinion to want to get themselves to that polling place to vote, I think that voice is important to be heard.
Now, in terms of expansions in this way, one of the elements here is giving voting rights back to felons after they've been released from prison. Um, what's the argument for that?
Well, it's a couple of things. First of all, right now we have a law on the books that says once you've completed the terms of your sentence that you automatically have your voting rights restored. The problem is it's not working automatically. The way the system works between the voter registration rolls, the Department of Corrections, and the judicial districts, that information is not working the way that it should. We have a lot of people who should automatically have that right restored who are having to jump through additional hoops after they complete the terms of their sentence. So that's number one. Number two, for many people, to complete the terms of your sentence, there are fines and fees still to be paid. And in this country, we call that a poll tax. If you have to get out a checkbook and make a payment in order to be able to vote, that is unconstitutional and that's a problem. So what we're trying to do with this legislation is not only get rid of the constitutional issue, but streamline the administrative process. If you are incarcerated for a felony, you can't, you are losing, your rights. You're also incarcerated, right? So you can't move freely about society, et cetera, et cetera. But if you're out and you're trying to get your life back, get back into society, and hopefully, we don't want these folks to reoffend and go back through the system. And the more part of society they feel, we know the evidence shows they're less likely to do that. And being a voter is part of that process.
In terms of things that we know from, say, social science research, uh, you know, young people skew Democratic, they lean more liberal, felons, Native voters, a lot of the groups that you're talking about expanding access to are people who historically vote Democratic. And plus straight party ticket voting, we know is, you can make the argument, Republicans would say, oh, this is an obvious giveaway from the Democratic Party leadership to these down ballot candidates that nobody's ever heard of. All people have to do is push Democrat at the top and boom, everyone gets elected. No one on the city level or county level is ever going to get elected, no matter how independent or moderate they are. Is this just a big Christmas gift, post-Christmas gift to Democrats?
I think that's a really cynical way of looking at it. And it's a highly politicized way of looking at it, because really at the end of the day, what we're talking about is giving options to folks who are our neighbors, our friends, people who live in our communities, and we don't necessarily know how they're going to choose to vote. Unfortunately, the way it's worked out in this country is that folks who have tended to vote more Democratic have been the folks who maybe are on the lower end of the economic spectrum and who have more barriers and who have more difficulty in meeting the requirements or getting to a polling place or, living in a part of the state where it's easier to vote versus not. And so I don't necessarily think that is the truth. And I also think that there's a really political lens that's being applied to this that begs the question of, well, if you think adding people to our process and expanding our democracy is bad for one particular political party or the other, I think that says more about the political party than it does about our democracy. I really think that when we look at voting, we need to look at the small d, right? Small d democracy. Who's participating, who's being allowed into the process, and who isn't. And at the end of the day, how they vote at the ballot box and what party they associate with should be the last thing that we're concerned with.
Automatic voter registration. 20 states do this. And so effectively, you're at the MVD or you're interacting with a government agency. And instead of them having to ask you, do you want to register to vote? You have to say, don't. You have to opt out instead of opting in. What's the difference?
Well, I think the difference is, so we've done a lot of great work to really streamline the voter registration process at MVD over the years. And now it is a very quick and easy process to get registered at the end of a transaction. The problem is the end of a transaction is when everybody is trying to get out the door. I know MVD is doing a great job here in New Mexico of being a lot quicker, a lot more efficient, making the process a lot less difficult than it used to be. But, at the end of the day, it's the last thing you have to do before you leave the motor vehicle division with your license or with your registration. And, too often we're trying to cram these appointments in, on a lunch hour, on a break, at the end of the day between leaving work and picking up kids from school. So this is just another voter-friendly efficiency that will make life easier for folks. And if they don't want to be registered to vote, they don't have to be. They can still opt out of the process if that's what they so choose. But at least they won't have to, accidentally or unintentionally not register to vote because they're trying to meet the other demands of their lives.
And, to play devil's advocate here, I mean, shouldn't registering to vote be something that requires one iota of effort? I mean, as less effort than picking up your kid from school or picking up the mail, but is it really that it shouldn't require anything at all?
It's an interesting question. I think voter registration is important. We have a state in this country that doesn't even require voter registration. You just show up to the polls and you vote. You fill out a form and give your information. So there is an argument to be made that we don't even need voter registration. But I think the argument that, you should have to jump through a hurdle in order to vote, and we should make that hurdle more difficult. I mean, that's a slippery slope, right? So how hard does it have to be to register to vote for you as a citizen to be making the appropriate amount of effort in order to do your civic duty and cast your ballot? I view it as the job of the government to make that process as simple and easy as possible. We should be reducing barriers to the ballot box, encouraging that civic democratic participation, particularly for people who, really find it hard to fit all of these things into a day when they have so much else going on in their lives.
And as you were talking there, I was thinking about going to vote. I think I went to the polls once during the pandemic, but I think I've also voted by mail, preferably, right? So,
Yeah.
one of the things that you're talking about here is giving people more time to send and receive their absentee ballots. Did this come about because of the pandemic, or is this, I mean, how much time do people really need?
Yeah, you're asking a question that as we came together as a leadership team, myself, the governor, our legislative leadership, we really took a close look at that. We've got a couple of different pieces of legislation moving through the process right now. And one of them is addressing those timeframes that we did have temporarily during 2020. We took a look at that, and what we were able to do is say, you know what? The timeframes that we had in 2020 really worked for the voters here in New Mexico. We didn't necessarily need to extend that time on the back end. We had very, very, very few, less than one ballot per county that was still outstanding after 7 p.m. on election day. So we did make actually a decision not to include that expanded time frame. We still have expanded timeframes for our overseas and military voters. That is very important because we know it does take a while to get the mail when you're overseas. But at the end of the day, I think we're going to still be good with the process we have now, as long as you can drop a ballot off at a convenient drop box near you or in your county and don't have to rely on that mail service.
And what about expanding early voting?
That's another piece that we took a look and we said, you know what we are doing here in New Mexico is working for New Mexicans. We talked with county clerks. Again, we did not have a lot of issues of folks not being able to make. We have that 28 full days of early voting at clerk's offices and 2 weeks at the end of the process at satellite locations. So there have been, some streamlining decisions made on some of these policies as we head into, hearing these bills in the legislative process.
So today, you released a report done by political science professor Lana Atkinson, no stranger to our program, about voter attitudes in the 2020 election. Can you give us an idea of some of the major points? I mean, you paid for this, the professor did it. What did she find?
It's a very robust report, and Professor Atkinson and I have been working on this report for many years. She did the first one in 2006 before I became county clerk in Bernalillo County. We did it every election. I was county clerk in Bernalillo County, and now we've done it again statewide since I've been in this office. We have this rich, robust, time series of information, and the kinds of things that she and her team have been looking at, have been taking a 360-degree view of the election process. So, going into polling places, how is it actually working as voters come in to vote, watching poll official training, and then of course interviewing random samples of voters before and after the election process. What we have found over time, or I should say what she has found over time, and what I have learned over time, is voter confidence has continued to improve here in New Mexico, but the key to that has been that every time we do one of these evaluations and find out, voters really liked this, or maybe they had to wait too long in line, or, maybe this process didn't work really well for them, we've gotten recommendations back. We've been able to make changes to the process that are reflective of that feedback. And I think that's continued to improve.
So let me guess, they told you they just want to do it on their phone. Why can't I just do this? Can I just text it? Can I just text my vote?
Wants to vote on their phone. That is something that pops up a lot. And of course, the reality is we don't have a secure internet. We're not there yet with the technology, but we're trying to do everything else we can for voters online. We do have high voter confidence in New Mexico. What I will say is this last 2020 election, a lot of questions have come up about the election process that are sowing doubt about the integrity of elections. So one thing we learned is that about a third of voters don't know that their ballot is completely private. Nobody knows how you vote, not a poll official, not a county clerk, not an absentee ballot team member. So one of the things we did really learn is we have work to do to make sure voters know exactly how elections work in the state, everything we're doing to ensure the integrity of the process, and what will make them feel more confident if they knew we were doing that.
And, this is a serious issue. People are concerned about the integrity of elections. People are concerned about the security of elections. But we didn't talk about any of that a minute ago in your proposal. It was all about expanding access. Are you proposing anything in terms of election security?
Yeah, well, the funny thing is that we've been way ahead of the game in election security and integrity here in New Mexico. Since 2008, we've been conducting post-election audits. That's one of the main reasons we moved to an all-paper ballot system in 2006. We have tons of robust security built into the process already. One of the pieces of legislation that's moving through the election process this year, it's called the Election Security and Administration Bill. It's Senate Bill 6. It does continue to tweak our processes and improve them. One of the things it's going to do is require county clerks to do an audit of absentee ballots as they're coming in, just to make sure that that information that's on the ballot is accurate and correct. We're adding to our post-election process every single statewide election, not just the general election here in New Mexico. And we're going to ensure that every county has to audit at least one precinct. Right now, the way it works is there's a random sample of precincts, and maybe your county gets a precinct selected, maybe it doesn't. And so we're going to ensure that at least somewhere in every county gets audited, so that we can just sort of add to that process, that back end process of ensuring the accuracy and integrity of the election. There's a ton more I could, talk you and I both sick, but those are a few of the things that we're doing in that bill.
Well, thank you for giving us this update on what your proposals are and on the research. We really appreciate your time.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.